My name is Maya Vance. For 24 years, I lived in a house built of books, paper, and the suffocating ego of my father, Arthur Vance. He was a literary lion, a man whose every word was treated as gospel by the critics. But lions grow old, and their claws go blunt. While the world waited for his magical comeback, I was the one in the study, breathing life into his exhausted prose. I wasn't just his daughter, I was his ghost. I spent 3 years pouring my soul into a manuscript called The Weight of Silence, a memoir of pain, discovery, and raw human emotion. I thought I was helping him find his voice again. Instead, he stole mine. He published the book under his name, took the 6-figure advance, and watched as it became a global bestseller, leaving me to wash his coffee mugs while he signed his books for adoring fans. But Arthur forgot one thing. A ghost can haunt, and I kept the receipts. I have the original drafts, written in my messy teenage handwriting in old school notebooks from years ago, the DNA of a masterpiece he claims to have birthed overnight. Now the lion is about to face the law, and I am the one holding the cage. The smell of a prestigious publishing house is a specific blend of expensive floor wax, expensive pressurized espresso, and the cold, metallic scent of ambition. Walking into the offices of Sterling and Thorne felt like entering a temple where my father was the high priest. But as I sat in the corner of the velvet-lined waiting room, clutching my tattered leather bag, I felt like a trespasser in my own life. "Mr. Vance will be out in a moment, Maya," the receptionist said, her smile as synthetic as the silk flowers on her desk. "He's just finishing the final signing for the first edition of The Weight of Silence. It's a record breaker, you know. Your father is truly a genius." A genius. The word felt like a physical blow to my ribs. I knew exactly what was inside that book. I knew every comma, every fractured metaphor, and every heartbeat of the narrative, because I had bled them onto the page during the long, lonely nights in our drafty Victorian house in Vermont. While Arthur was downstairs drowning his writer's block in expensive scotch, I was upstairs, translating my own trauma into art. "Maya, there you are," my father boomed, stepping out of the mahogany-paneled inner sanctum. He looked radiant. The wrinkles on his face seemed to have smoothed out under the glow of success. He wore a tweed jacket that cost more than my entire education. "Did you bring the files for the second printing? The editors are clamoring for the author's note I mentioned." "I brought the files, Dad," I said, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. We walked into his private office, a room filled with awards he hadn't won in 20 years until now. He threw himself into his leather chair, the king returning to his throne. "The advance hit the account this morning, Maya," he said, not looking at me as he flipped through a stack of glowing reviews from the New York Times. $600,000. This secures the estate for another decade. We can finally fix the roof, maybe get you that little apartment in the city you've been whining about." "I wasn't whining about it, Dad. I was asking for the royalties from the book I actually wrote." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of a city that believed Arthur Vance was a god. Arthur looked up, his expression shifting from triumph to a cold, condescending pity. "Royalties, Maya? Be reasonable. You're a gifted amateur. You helped me polish the rough edges. You were my researcher, my assistant. But the soul of the book? That comes from the Vance name. No one would buy a memoir about silence from a 20-something girl who's never left the county. You should be grateful I even gave you a special thanks on the last page." "A special thanks?" I whispered. "I wrote the chapter on Mother's death. I wrote the sequence about the winter of '98. I lived those words, Dad. You were too drunk to remember them." "Careful, Maya," His voice dropped, an octave, becoming the predatory growl of the lion he used to be. You live in my house, you eat my food, you used my name to get into those research archives. Without me, you are a girl with a notebook. With me, you are the daughter of a legend. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. He reached out and took the folder from my hand, dismissing me with a wave of his gold-plated pen. I walked out of the building and into the cold drizzle of a New York afternoon. My chest felt hollow. For years, I had believed that my invisibility was a small price to pay for his survival. I thought that by giving him my words, I was saving our family. But as I watched a taxi drive past with an advertisement for his book on its side, I realized I wasn't saving him. I was enabling a thief. I went to my small, cramped hotel room, a room I had paid for with the meager savings I made from college ghostwriting essays. I reached into the bottom of my bag and pulled out a bundle of old blue-lined school notebooks. They were 10 years ago. They were filled with poems, observations, and the first raw iterations of the story that had become The Weight of Silence. My handwriting had changed over the years, but the voice, the sharp, uncompromising voice of a girl who saw too much, was unmistakable. I opened the first notebook to page 32. There it was, the exact opening sentence of the bestseller. The loudest sound in the world is the breath of a secret you can't keep. Underneath it, in my 15-year-old script, was a date. March 14th, 2016, 3 years before Arthur Vance had even claimed to have the vision for the book. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had found in a legal directory for copyright and intellectual property. Hello, my name is Maya Vance, and I'd like to report a case of grand-scale literary fraud, and I'd like to speak with a prosecutor. Who is the accused? The voice on the other end asked. My father, I said, and the evidence is currently topping the bestseller list.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The headline of the Literary Gazette felt like a bucket of ice water. Lion under siege. Vance's daughter claims plagiarism. By 8 a.m., my phone was a glowing coal of missed calls and vitriolic text messages. My father hadn't called me. He didn't need to. He spoke through a press release issued by his high-priced legal firm, Blackwood and Finch. They called my claim a tragic cry for attention from a troubled young woman who failed to launch her own career. I sat in a small, windowless office in Lower Manhattan, across from Sarah Jenkins, a copyright attorney who looked like she chewed through steel for breakfast. On the desk between us lay the blue-lined school notebooks, their edges curled and stained with tea. "They're going to come for your character, Maya," Sarah said, flipping through a notebook from 2017. "They'll say you stole his drafts and transcribed them into these old books to create a fake timeline. They'll bring in psychiatrists to testify that you're obsessed with his fame. Do you have anything else? Letters, emails, digital footprints?" "He forbade me from using a computer for my creative process," I said, a bitter smile touching my lips. "He said real writers use pen and paper. Now I know why. No metadata, no timestamps, just his word against mine." "But look at the ink, Sarah." I pointed to a paragraph on page 84. "That's a specific brand of cheap ballpoint pen they stopped making in 2018. If I had faked this recently, the chemical composition of the ink wouldn't match the age of the paper. And look at the margin notes. Those are my biology homework assignments from senior year. Did I fake a failed quiz on cellular respiration just to frame my father 5 years later? Sarah looked up, a predatory glint in her eye. Now that is something a forensic expert can sink their teeth into. The first preliminary hearing was a circus. My father arrived in a black town car, looking every bit the victimized patriarch. He didn't look at me once. He walked past the cameras with a dignified sorrow that made my stomach turn. Inside the courtroom, the air was stagnant. Arthur's lead counsel, a man who smelled of expensive peppermint and arrogance, stood up. "Your Honor, this is a shakedown. Mr. Vance is a national treasure. His daughter, while clearly possessing some derivative talent, has lived in his shadow so long she has begun to hallucinate that his genius is her own. These notebooks are a fabrication, a desperate attempt to hijack the success of the weight of silence." Then it was our turn. Sarah didn't play the notebooks immediately. She called a surprise witness, Elias Thorne, the junior editor at Sterling and Thorne, who had worked on the manuscript's final polish. Elias was pale, his hands shaking as he took the stand. He looked at my father, who was staring him down with the intensity of a predator. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah began, "during the editorial process, did you ever have concerns about Mr. Vance's grasp of the material?" Yes, Elias whispered. "There were sections, the most emotional ones, the ones about the mother, where I asked Arthur to clarify the subtext. He couldn't do it. He would get angry and tell me the prose spoke for itself. But once, when he stepped out of the room, I saw his personal copy of the draft. It was covered in a different handwriting, smaller, faster, the same handwriting I see in those school notebooks." The courtroom erupted. My father leaned over to his lawyer, his face turning a dark mottled red. "Liar!" Arthur shouted, breaking the decorum. "He's a disgruntled employee. I fired him for incompetence." "You fired him the day after he asked about the handwriting, didn't you, Mr. Vance?" Sarah countered, her voice like a whip. But the victory was short-lived. On that night, I returned to my hotel room to find the door kicked in. The room had been tossed, but they weren't looking for jewelry or my laptop. The safe where I had kept the secondary bundle of notebooks, the ones from the college years, was empty. My heart plummeted. They had the physical evidence for the second half of the book. Without those, I only had half a story. I called Sarah, panic rising in my throat. "They took them, Sarah. They broke in. My father's security team must have—" "Stay calm, Maya," Sarah interrupted. "Did they take the grade 9 notebook, the one we entered into evidence today?" "No, the court has that one, but they took the rest, the ending, the climax. I can't prove I wrote the last 10 chapters now." "They think they've won," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous hum. "But they just committed a felony to cover up a fraud, and they forgot one thing about writers, Maya. We don't just write things once. We rewrite, we obsess. Is there anywhere else those words exist?" I thought back to the old Victorian house, to the attic. There was a loose floorboard under the radiator where I used to hide my failures, the drafts that Arthur said were too feminine or weak for his brand. "The house," I whispered, "but he's changed the locks. There are guards." "Then we don't go as lawyers," Sarah said. "We go as a search party." The next day, the media narrative shifted. My father did a televised interview on a major morning show. He looked heartbroken. "I forgive her," he told the interviewer, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. "She's my daughter. I just want her to get the help she needs. This lawsuit is the result of a mental breakdown. I will not prosecute her for the theft of my drafts, provided she enters a facility for treatment." He was trying to lock me away. If he could get me committed to a psychiatric ward, the lawsuit would be dismissed, and I would be silenced forever. But I wasn't in a facility. I was in a car with Elias and a private investigator, driving through the rain toward the Vermont border.
"If we get caught, this is breaking and entering," Elias said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's not breaking and entering if I still have the deed," I said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from my pocket. "My mother left the house to both of us. He never told me. I found the documents in Sarah's office during the discovery phase. He's been trespassing on my property for 5 years." We reached the house at midnight. The guards were in the kitchen, probably drinking Arthur's scotch. We slipped through the servants' entrance, the one with the broken latch I had used for years to sneak out and watch the stars. The attic was cold, smelling of dust and forgotten things. I knelt by the radiator, my fingers fumbling with the loose floorboard. Please, please be there. I pulled the board back. Inside wasn't a notebook, it was a digital voice recorder, an old silver Olympus model I had used to record my own read-alouds to check the rhythm of the prose. I hit play. Chapter 14. My own teenage voice echoed in the dark attic. The shadow of the oak tree wasn't a shadow all it was a stain on the memory of the grass. I checked the timestamp on the device. It hadn't been turned on since 2019. It was a digital fossil. It was the smoking gun. Suddenly, the attic door creaked open. The light from a flashlight cut through the darkness, blinding me. "Give it to me, Maya," a voice said. It wasn't a guard. It was my father. He was standing there, his face twisted in a way I had never seen. Not the lion, but the scavenger. "You think you can destroy me? I made you. I gave you the life you have. That recording, it's just a girl reading her father's work. No one will believe you." "They'll believe the timestamp, Dad," I said, clutching the recorder to my chest. "You claimed you didn't even have a title for the book until 2021. This recording is from 2 years before that. You can't explain this away." "I can explain anything," he hissed, stepping closer. "I have the critics. I have the publishers. I have the money. What do you have? A dusty room and a toy?" "I have the truth," I said, stepping back towards the window. "And unlike your books, the truth doesn't need an editor."
The television studio smelled of hairspray, hot dust from the stage lights, and the metallic tang of high-stakes adrenaline. I sat in the green room, my skin feeling too tight for my body. On the monitor, I could see my father getting his makeup touched up. He looked calm, practiced, the lion of American letters, preparing to devour a stray cub. He didn't know that the digital recorder I had found in the attic was already being analyzed by the FBI's forensic audio unit. "Are you sure about this, Maya?" Sarah Jenkins asked, her reflection appearing in the vanity mirror behind me. She was wearing a power suit that looked like armor. "If you freeze up, if the pressure gets to you, he'll use it as proof that you're unstable. He's a professional performer. You're a ghost." "That's exactly why I have to do it, Sarah," I said, looking at my ink-stained cuticles. "He's a performer, but he hasn't been a writer in a decade. He's forgotten the weight of a pen. I haven't." The show was The Evening Hour, the most watched talk show in the country. The host, a man known for his hard-hitting empathy, introduced us with a somber tone. "Tonight, a family tragedy plays out in the Temple of Art. Arthur Vance, the man who gave us The Weight of Silence, faces the daughter who claims it was hers. To settle the matter of voice, both have agreed to a spontaneous writing challenge. 10 minutes, 1 prompt. The world as their witness." I walked onto the stage. The applause for my father was a roar. For me, it was a polite, confused pitter-patter. We sat at 2 identical desks separated by 10 feet of expensive floor and a lifetime of resentment. "The prompt," the host announced, opening a sealed gold envelope, "is the first lie. Your time starts now." I didn't hesitate. I didn't even think. The words were already there, bubbling up from that dark, quiet place where I had spent 20 years hiding. My pen flew across the legal pad. The first lie wasn't spoken, it was tasted. It was the copper tang of a bitten lip, the flavor of a secret held so tightly it began to ferment in the throat. I could hear the scratch of my own pen, but from the other desk there was silence. I glanced sideways. My father was holding the pen, his knuckles white. He was staring at the blank yellow paper as if it were a window into his own grave. He wrote a word, then scratched it out. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the ceiling. He was waiting for a ghost to whisper in his ear, but the ghost was sitting 10 feet away, writing her own future. 5 minutes, the host whispered. The audience began to murmur. The silence from the great Arthur Vance was becoming deafening. He began to sweat, the studio lights reflecting off his forehead. He wrote a sentence, then another, his movements frantic and jerky. "Time," the host called out. "Maya, would you like to read first?" the host asked. I stood up. My voice didn't shake. I read the 3 paragraphs I had produced, a visceral, haunting meditation on the loss of innocence. When I finished, the silence in the room was different. It wasn't confusion. It was the heavy, breathless silence that followed a punch to the gut. "And now, Mr. Vance?" My father cleared his throat. He smoothed his jacket. He looked at the page and began to read. "The lie, it was a thing of great darkness, a shadow that fell across the heart of the man who sought only the truth. It was a weight of silence." He stopped. He looked at the page, then at the audience. It was a collection of clichés, a pale imitation of his own earlier work, devoid of the rhythm and soul that had made the memoir a masterpiece. It sounded like a parody written by a man who had read a summary of a Vance novel, but never the book itself. That's all I have for the preliminary sketch," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "Art isn't a sprint, you see. It's a marathon. I don't perform on command like a trained seal." "But your daughter just did," the host said, his voice losing his empathetic edge, "and her sketch sounds exactly like the voice in The Weight of Silence. Yours sounds like a different man entirely. It's a different project," Arthur shouted, his face turning that familiar mottled red. "You're all in on it. You've been bought by her lawyers. Sterling and Thorne will hear about this." He stormed off the stage, knocking over his chair. The cameras followed him, catching the moment he shoved a production assistant out of the way. It was the death of a legend captured in 4K resolution. Back in the green room, Sarah was already on the phone. "The literary boards are exploding, Maya. The forensic report on the recorder just came back. It's a 99% match for the original manuscript structure. And we just got an anonymous tip from his longtime accountant. Arthur's been funneling money into offshore accounts to avoid the audit we requested." "It's over, isn't it?" I asked, feeling a strange lack of triumph. "For his career? Yes, but the criminal case is just beginning," Sarah said. "The publisher is suing him for the return of the advance, and the district attorney is looking into fraud charges. But there's a problem." "What problem?" "The contract," Sarah said, showing me a document on her tablet. "When you signed those research assistant agreements years ago, there was a clause, a work-for-hire provision. It says that anything you produced while in his employ belongs to the Vance estate. He's claiming that even if you wrote it, he owns it legally." I looked at the document. I remembered the day he had me sign it. I was 19, and he told me it was standard insurance for the house. He'd been planning this for years. He hadn't just stolen my book, he had legally enslaved my mind before I even knew I had a voice. "Can he really do that?" I asked.
In a standard civil case, maybe, but work for hire doesn't cover fraud. If we can prove he coerced you or that the contract was signed under false pretenses, we can break it. But we need a witness who saw the coercion, someone who was there when the employment began. I knew only one person who fit that description, my mother's sister, Aunt Clara. She'd lived with us during the year I wrote the first notebooks, but she and my father hadn't spoken in a decade. She lived in a remote cabin in the Maine woods, a woman who had seen the lion for exactly what he was, and fled. "We have to find Clara," I said. "She's the only one who knows the truth about the assistant contract."
The pines of Maine are different from the rolling hills of Vermont. They are jagged, dark, and indifferent. As we crossed the border, the GPS started to flicker, the signal swallowed by the dense canopy. My Aunt Clara had chosen this isolation for a reason. She wasn't just hiding from the world. She was hiding from the ghost of a man who had hollowed her sister out until there was nothing left but ink and bone. "The black SUV is still back there, Maya," Elias said, his voice tight. He glanced at the rearview mirror. "They've been hanging back 3 cars deep since Portland. Your father isn't playing the heartbroken patriarch anymore. He's playing the cleaner." "He can't afford for me to talk to Clara," I whispered, clutching my bag. "She's the only one who saw the original assistant agreement. She was the witness who signed it, and she's the only one who remembers what happened the night my mother fell." We turned onto a logging road, the tires crunching over gravel and frozen mud. The SUV didn't turn with us. It accelerated, its high beams cutting through our rear window like searchlights. "Elias, floor it!" I shouted. The chase was short but violent. Elias pushed the old sedan to its limit, the engine screaming as we swerved around a fallen branch. We rounded a sharp bend, and suddenly a wall of iron bars appeared in the headlights. A gate. "Stop! Stop!" I cried. Elias slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt inches from the gate. Behind us, the SUV screeched to a stop. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out, their faces obscured by shadows. But before they could reach our doors, a sharp crack echoed through the woods. "This is private property," a voice boomed from the darkness above. "The next one goes through your radiator. Get back in the truck and crawl back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The men paused, looked at the cabin, then at each other. They knew Arthur Vance wouldn't pay them enough to die in a ditch in Maine. They backed away, climbed into the SUV, and reversed slowly into the darkness. The woman on the porch didn't lower the gun until the sound of their engine faded into the distance. "Maya?" she called out, her voice raspy but familiar. "Is that you, little bird?" "It's me, Clara." I stepped out of the car, my legs shaking. Clara hadn't changed much in 10 years. Her hair was a wild shock of white, and her face was a map of hard winters. She led us inside a cabin that smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and old paper. Thousands of books lined the walls, not the pristine editions in my father's library, but battered, dog-eared copies that had actually been read. "I saw the interview, Maya," Clara said, pouring us tea that tasted of pine needles and honey. She sat in a rocking chair that creaked like a warning. "I saw you on that stage. You looked just like your mother when she realized Arthur had sold her first poem to a magazine as his own. That same look of, how could he?" "You knew?" I asked, the teacup trembling in my hands. "You knew he was stealing even then?" Arthur Vance didn't have an original thought in his head since 1990. He was a parasite. He fed on your mother's brilliance until she withered. And when she tried to leave him, when she told him she was going to the press, that's when the accident happened. "The stairs. He said she tripped. He said she was depressed." "She wasn't depressed, Maya. She was empowered. She had a folder of evidence. She had the drafts of his first big hit, The Crimson Gate. She was going to meet a lawyer the next morning. Clara stood up and walked to a heavy iron chest in the corner. She unlocked it and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon. She sent these to me a week before she died. She knew he was dangerous. I opened the top letter. My mother's handwriting was so much like mine, it felt like looking in a mirror. Arthur is spiraling. He's convinced the world belongs to him because he curates the art. He made me sign a document today, a work-for-hire agreement. He said it was for the taxes, but I saw the look in his eyes. He wants to own my thoughts even after I leave him. If anything happens to me, look under the floorboards of the summer house. The summer house was torn down years ago, I said, my heart sinking. He built his new study over it. But the document she mentions, the one he made you sign too, Clara said, leaning in. I was the witness, but I didn't sign the version his lawyers have in court. I signed a different one. Arthur had 2 copies. One was the slave contract. The other was a partnership agreement that gave your mother, and subsequently you, 50% of everything. He must have forged my signature on the one they're using now. Can you prove it? Elias asked. Clara reached into the envelope and pulled out a small, yellowed piece of paper. It was a notary's receipt from a tiny office in Montpelier dated the same day as the contract. The notary was a friend of mine, Clara said. He recorded the true nature of the document. Arthur doesn't know this exists. He thought he burned all the bridges. This breaks the work-for-hire clause, Elias said, his eyes lighting up. If the contract they submitted is a forgery, it's not just fraud, it's perjury. He'll go to prison, Maya, for a long time. But as I looked at the letters, a darker realization hit me. I read further into my mother's last message. He's started putting something in my tea, she wrote. I feel slow, heavy. My memory is slipping. He tells the doctor I'm losing my mind, just like my grandmother, but I know it's him. He's writing the end of my story before I can finish it. He didn't just push her, Clara, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He poisoned her reputation and her body. He turned her life into a plot point. And he's doing the same to you, Maya, Clara said, taking my hand. Her skin was like parchment, but her grip was iron. Using the same script, the unstable daughter, the mental breakdown. He's a one-trick pony, but that trick is lethal. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered and died. Outside, the forest went silent. No crickets, no wind. They're back, Elias said, looking through the curtains. And this time, they didn't bring high beams. They're coming in on foot. The cellar, Clara commanded, her shotgun already in her hand. There's a tunnel that leads to the old mine shaft. Take the letters, take the receipt. If they find you with those, you won't make it to the trial. What about you? I asked. I've been waiting 10 years for Arthur to send someone to my door, Clara said, a grim smile appearing on her face. I have enough propane tanks and tripwires around this perimeter to light up the whole county. Now go. As we descended into the cold, damp dark of the cellar, I heard the first explosion, a dull thud that shook the floorboards. Clara was fighting her own war, and I was carrying the only thing that could end his.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The air in the mine shaft tasted of wet slate and copper. Every drip of water from the ceiling sounded like a footstep, every rustle of a bat's wing like a whispered threat. I clutched the bundle of my mother's letters to my chest, the paper crinkling against my racing heart. Beside me, Elias held a dying flashlight, its beam flickering against the jagged rock walls. We were moving through a physical manifestation of my father's mind, dark, cold, and filled with dead ends. "The map Clara gave us says the tunnel splits 300 yards ahead," Elias whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. "Left leads to the old granite quarry, right leads to the highway culvert. If we take the right, we're exposed. If we take the left, we might get lost." "Take the left," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the stone throat of the mine. "They'll be waiting at the highway. Arthur knows I'm a creature of logic. He expects me to take the shortest route. We need to be the ghost he thinks I am." As we stumbled deeper, my phone vibrated. A single bar of service. A news alert popped up, glowing like a malevolent eye in the dark. "Arthur Vance discovers lost manuscript of deceased wife. A gift from the beyond," says grieving author. I stopped dead. I opened the article. There was a photo of Arthur holding up a sheaf of papers, the exact papers they had stolen from my hotel room. My new novel, my first independent work. He was telling the world it was my mother's last message, framed as a fragmentary masterpiece that he would lovingly complete. "He's erasing me, Elias," I choked out, tears of pure rage stinging my eyes. "He's taking the words I wrote to free myself and turning them into a tribute to the woman he destroyed. If he publishes that, I can never claim it. To the world, I'll be the girl trying to steal from her dead mother's ghost." "Not if we get that notary receipt to Sarah," Elias grabbed me. "Maya, look at the rock. There's a draft coming from the left. That means there's an opening. Move." Behind us, we heard the sound of heavy boots hitting the stone. The consultants had found the cellar entrance. They were coming into the dark after us. We ran. The tunnel narrowed until we were crawling on our hands and knees through freezing mud. My fingernails tore, my jeans soaked through, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the heat of the letters against my skin. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a massive cathedral-like chamber, the old granite quarry. High above, a jagged crack in the earth let in a sliver of moonlight. It was beautiful and terrifying. "There," Elias pointed to a rusted iron ladder bolted to the far wall. "It leads to the observation ledge. From there, we can reach the forest trail." We scrambled across the loose scree, the stones clattering like bones. I reached the ladder first, my hands slick with mud. I climbed, my muscles screaming, until I reached the ledge 20 feet up. I reached down to help Elias. "Give me the bag first," Elias shouted, his foot slipping on a loose rock. I swung the bag up, but as I did, a flashlight hit us from the tunnel entrance. "Stop right there, Miss Vance," a voice boomed. It wasn't one of the guards. It was Marcus Reed, my father's personal fixer, a man who had been the shadow at the edge of every Vance book signing for a decade. "The old man wants those papers back," he said. "He says they're part of the family archive." "The family archive is a crime scene, Marcus," I yelled back, the echo magnifying my voice until it sounded like a choir of vengeful spirits. "Tell him the ghost has found her voice." Reed pulled something from his belt. Not a gun, a tablet. He hit a button, and a video call connected. My father's face appeared on the giant screen projected against the cavern wall by a portable laser unit. He looked like a god made of pixels and lies. "Maya," Arthur's voice boomed through the quarry, "be reasonable. You're in a hole in the ground. You have nothing. If you hand over the letters and the recorder, I will set up a trust fund. You can live anywhere. Paris, Rome. Just stop this madness." "Is that what you told Mom before she fell?" I asked, my voice steady. "Did you offer her a trust fund to buy her silence?" Arthur's face contorted. "Your mother was a tragedy. You are a nuisance. Marcus, take the bag. If she resists, well, the quarry is deep and the police are already looking for a woman in a manic episode." Marcus started up the ladder. "Elias, the winch!" I pointed to an old, rusted crane arm used for moving granite blocks.
Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy iron bar and jammed it in the gears of the ancient machine. The winch groaned, a cable snapping like a whip. A massive slab of half-cut granite, suspended for decades by rusted chains, began to tilt. "Look out!" Elias screamed. The slab didn't fall on Marcus. It fell between the ladder and the tunnel, sealing the entrance with a roar that shook the very foundation of the mountain. Dust exploded into the air, blinding everyone. In the chaos, we scrambled up the remaining rungs and out through the crack in the earth. We emerged into the cold night air, our lungs burning, our skins stinging from the frost. We weren't on the highway. We were on a ridge overlooking the valley. Below us, Clara's cabin was a glowing ember in the dark. The fire hadn't spread to the forest. She had been careful, but the message was clear. The bridge to the past was burned. "My car is gone," Elias said, looking at the empty logging road. "We have to walk to the nearest town. It's 12 miles. "Then we walk," I said, looking at the digital recorder. "But we're not going to a town. We're going to a radio station." "What?" "My father is a master of the slow, curated lie. He thinks he can control the narrative with lawyers and lost manuscripts. But I'm going to use the one thing he can't edit, a live broadcast. He wants to publish Mom's book? Fine, I'm going to read her letters on the air tonight." We reached a small community college radio station in the next valley by 4 a.m. The night DJ, a girl no older than I was, looked at our muddy, bruised faces with shock. "I'm Maya Vance," I said, stepping into the booth. The DJ's eyes widened. Everyone in the country knew the name. She hit the on-air light. "You're live in 5, 4, 3. I sat at the microphone. I didn't have a script. I had the truth. "My name is Maya Vance," I began, my voice clear and resonant, carrying across the airwaves to every truck driver, every early riser, and eventually to the penthouse office where my father was waiting for his fixer to call. "For years, you've been told that my father is a genius of the human soul, but tonight I'm going to read you the words of the woman who actually built that soul. This is a letter from my mother written 6 days before her accident." I read about the tea, the fear, the stolen poems, and the forgery. I read until the sun began to rise over the main horizon. By the time I finished, the phone lines of the station were jammed. The story wasn't just literary anymore. It was a true crime sensation unfolding in real time. As I walked out of the booth, Elias was staring at the TV in the lobby. "Maya, look!" Arthur Vance was being escorted out of his New York apartment in handcuffs, not for plagiarism, for the offshore accounts and the tax evasion that the audit had finally uncovered, but also for questioning related to a cold case from 20 years ago. The DA had seen the broadcast. The letters had provided probable cause to reopen the investigation into my mother's death. But as I watched him fall, I felt a sharp pang of dread. I looked at the news ticker at the bottom of the screen. Publishing giant Sterling and Thorne announces recovery of Vance assets, claims ownership of all pending manuscripts under moral turpitude clause. They're taking it all, the money, the house, and my new book. By destroying my father, I'd handed my work to a corporation that was even more heartless than he was.
The boardroom of Sterling and Thorne was a cathedral of glass and cold calculation. Marcus Thorne, the CEO, sat across from me, his fingers steepled. On the table lay the thick, black-bound manuscript of my novel, the one they had recovered from my father's seized assets. It looked like a corpse waiting for an autopsy. "Maya, let's be adults here. Thorne said, his voice as smooth as a polished gravestone. "Your father committed a massive fraud. He owes us millions. Under the work for hire and moral turpitude clauses of the Vance contracts, all derivative works produced under his roof now revert to the publisher to mitigate our losses. We own the copyright. We own the characters. We even own the title, The Echo of Blood." "It's not a derivative work," I said, my voice cold. "It's my life. I wrote it while I was running for my survival. You're just another thief, Marcus. You're just wearing a better suit." "Call me what you like," he shrugged, sliding a non-disclosure agreement toward me. "Sign this, and we'll give you a modest consultation fee to walk away. If you fight us, we'll bury you in litigation until you're 80. We have the best legal team in Manhattan. You have a public defender and a junior editor." I looked at Elias, who was standing by the door. He looked exhausted, but there was a spark of rebellion in his eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "I won't sign," I said, standing up. "You can keep the paper, Marcus, but you can't keep the story." "We already have it, Maya," Thorne laughed. "It's on our secure servers. The physical copy is in our vault. What are you going to do, rewrite it from memory?" I walked out of the building without another word. As soon as we reached the sidewalk, Elias grabbed my arm. "They've already started the marketing campaign, Maya. They're calling it the Mystery Manuscript. Pre-orders are already through the roof. They're going to make $50 million on your trauma." "Not if the book is already free," I said. "What do you mean?" "The digital recorder, Elias, in the attic. I didn't just record the chapters I read to my father. I used the voice-to-text sync feature on the Volkov cloud server while I was hiding in the library. I have the entire raw file, every word." We spent the next 6 hours in a windowless internet cafe in Queens. My fingers were a blur on the keys. I wasn't just uploading a PDF, I was creating a manifesto. I set up a decentralized website hosted on a dozen mirrored servers across 3 continents. I called it the Unbound Library. "This is not a product," the homepage read in bold black letters. "This is the truth. Written by Maya Vance, stolen by Arthur Vance, reclaimed from Sterling and Thorne. Read it, share it, do not buy it." I hit enter. Within an hour, the link was everywhere. Reddit, Twitter, TikTok. The literary community went into a frenzy. It was the ultimate act of copyright defiance. By the time Thorne's lawyers could send a cease and desist, the book had been downloaded 4 million times. The mystery manuscript was no longer a mystery. It was public property. I watched the news ticker on a nearby TV. "Sterling and Thorne stock plummets as Vance daughter leaks own novel. Publishing industry in crisis over piracy versus justice." "They're going to sue you for everything you'll ever earn, Maya," Elias said, looking at the numbers. "They'll claim you devalued their asset by tens of millions." "Let them," I said, a strange sense of peace washing over me. I don't want their money. I wanted my name back. And now every person who reads those words knows who wrote them. You can't sue a ghost for haunting her own house. But Marcus Thorne wasn't done. He called an emergency press conference. He didn't look defeated. He looked predatory. "We recognize Miss Vance's emotional distress," he told the cameras. "However, the leaked text is an unedited, raw draft. It contains potentially libelous statements against several high-profile figures. By releasing it, Maya Vance has opened herself up to dozens of personal injury lawsuits. Furthermore, we have evidence that this raw file was actually generated by an AI using Arthur Vance's style. We are moving forward with the official, authorized version." He was trying to poison the well. If he could convince the public that my leak was an AI-generated fake, his official version would still be the one people trusted. "He's gaslighting the entire world," Elias muttered. "He's going to release an edited version that paints Arthur the hero and you the villain." "He needs the authorized metadata to prove his version is the original," I said. "But there's one thing he doesn't have: my mother's original typewriter." "The one she used for the first book?" "The one Arthur lost. He didn't lose it. He gave it to his mistress in the Hamptons, a woman named Lydia Cross. She was his muse before I was his ghost. If that typewriter still exists, the microscopic fingerprints of the keys will match the indentations on the early drafts of The Weight of Silence. If we get that typewriter, we can prove the lineage of the style. We can prove that the Arthur voice was never Arthur's. It was a mechanical signature he stole from a machine and a woman. I looked at the map. The Hamptons, the playground of the elite, the place where my father's lies were born. "We're going to the beach, Elias," I said, "but we're not going for the sun. We're going for the evidence." As we drove, I realized that I was no longer just fighting for a book. I was fighting for the very concept of authorship. In a world of AI, forgeries, and corporate greed, the only thing that mattered was the physical, undeniable mark of the creator. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single crumpled page from the grade 9 notebook. I traced the letters of my own name. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a witness. "Maya, look behind us," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave. A black sedan was following us. Not an SUV, a sleek, high-end car, the kind the Sterling and Thorne security team used. They're not trying to stop us from getting to Lydia. They're trying to get there first. They want to destroy the typewriter before we can test it. Then we have to beat them, Elias said, flooring the accelerator. We reached the Cross estate just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The house was a fortress of white stone and glass. I jumped out of the car before Elias had even fully stopped. "Lydia! Lydia Cross, open the door! They're coming to take it!" The door opened. A woman in her 50s, elegant but with eyes that had seen too much, looked at me. She held a glass of wine in one hand and a cigarette in the other. "Maya, you have your mother's eyes and Arthur's timing. You're just in time for the bonfire." "Where is it, Lydia? The Remington, the 1954 quiet writer." "It's in the study," she said, pointing toward the back of the house. "But the authorized men are already in the driveway. They offered me $1 million to dispose of it. Why should I give it to you for free?" "Because he did it to you too, didn't he?" I asked, stopping and looking her in the eye. "He took your youth, your stories, and then he traded you for a younger model. You're not his muse, Lydia. You're just another chapter he's trying to burn." Lydia froze. The cigarette ash fell on her silk robe. She looked toward the driveway where the black sedan was pulling up. "The key is in the drawer," she whispered. "Take it. And, Maya, tell the world that he was a terrible lover, but an even worse writer." We made it to the car just as the security team entered the study. We heard the sound of glass breaking, but we were already gone. The typewriter was in my lap, heavy and cold, a lead weight of truth. "Next step?" Elias asked, his heart pounding against his ribs. "The forensic lab at NYU. We're going to put the Vance genius under a microscope, and then we're going to show Marcus Thorne that you can't own a voice that was never yours to begin with."
The lab was filled with the smell of ozone, old chemicals, and the cold, clinical scent of justice. Professor Hepburn, a man whose skin looked like crumpled parchment, bent over the comparison microscope. In one tray lay a page from my mother's 1994 diary. In the other, a page from Arthur Vance's masterpiece, The Crimson Gate. "Look here, Maya," Hepburn whispered, his voice trembling with academic excitement. "The letter E on your mother's Remington has a microscopic chip on the top curve, and the S always lands 0.2 millimeters below the baseline. Now, look at your father's original manuscript from the same year. It's a perfect match. Not just a stylistic match, but a mechanical one. He didn't just copy her words. He stole her actual machine and tried to claim he was the one sitting behind it." "And the new book?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The one they stole from me?" "I've run the digital rhythm analysis," Hepburn said, pointing to a glowing monitor.
The sentence structure, the frequency of semicolons, the specific way you use sensory adjectives. It's a 100% match with your grade 9 notebooks, and it's a 0% match with Arthur's solo works from the late 80s. This isn't just plagiarism, Maya. This is identity theft across generations. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Not a brownout, but a deliberate cut. A second later, the piercing shriek of the fire alarm tore through the silence of the university building. "What's happening?" Elias shouted, running to the window. "There's smoke coming from the ventilation shafts. They've tripped the chemical suppression system, but it's not spraying water, it's pumping in halon gas." "They're trying to suffocate the evidence," I realized, grabbing the Remington, and us with it. The hallway was a labyrinth of white fog and screaming sirens. We couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were being filled with dry ice. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. "The service elevator," Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. "It has its own air supply." We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. "Maya, go!" Elias pushed me toward the elevator. "I'll slow them down." "No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins." The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. "The service elevator," Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. "It has its own air supply." We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. "Maya, go!" Elias pushed me toward the elevator. "I'll slow them down." "No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins." The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. "The service elevator," Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. "It has its own air supply." We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. "Maya, go!" Elias pushed me toward the elevator. "I'll slow them down." "No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins." The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. "The service elevator," Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. "It has its own air supply." We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. "Maya, go!" Elias pushed me toward the elevator. "I'll slow them down." "No, Elias!
go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins. The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. The service elevator, Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. It has its own air supply. We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. Maya, go! Elias pushed me toward the elevator. I'll slow them down. No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins. The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. The service elevator, Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. It has its own air supply. We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. Maya, go! Elias pushed me toward the elevator. I'll slow them down. No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins. The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. The service elevator, Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. It has its own air supply. We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. Maya, go! Elias pushed me toward the elevator. I'll slow them down. No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins. The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. The service elevator, Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back. It has its own air supply. We stumbled through the fog. I could hear footsteps behind us, heavy, rhythmic, tactical. Thorne's security wasn't waiting for the fire to do the work. They were in the building. Crack! A bullet shattered a glass display case next to my head, showering me in shards of ancient pottery. Maya, go! Elias pushed me toward the elevator. I'll slow them down. No, Elias! Go! Get the report to the press. If we both stay, nobody wins. The elevator doors closed just as another shot rang out. I was alone in the small metal box, rising toward the roof. My eyes were stinging, my throat burning. I clutched the Remington to my chest. It was heavy, nearly 20 pounds of iron, but I wouldn't let it go. It was the only thing that could prove my mother existed. The service elevator, Hepburn gasped, pointing toward the back.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The final trial wasn't held in a courtroom, but in the court of global opinion. The Vance scandal had grown into something much larger than a copyright dispute. It had become a reckoning for the entire publishing industry. I sat in a small studio in London, prepared for a global broadcast. Behind me was a screen displaying the faces of 3 generations: Evelyn, the grandmother I never knew, Elena, the mother I lost, and me, the one who refused to be erased. For 80 years, I began, my voice steady, broadcast to millions. The world has admired the Vance genius. You praised the wisdom of men who had never felt the pain they wrote about. You gave awards to thieves who locked their muses in attics and asylums. But tonight, the ink stops running. I held up the 3rd notebook, the one I had found in the deepest layer of the attic. It was dated 1952. The handwriting was frantic, elegant, and unmistakably the source of everything we called literature. This is the work of Evelyn Vance. My grandfather stole her first novel and called it The Golden Orchard. When she protested, he had her committed. My father, Arthur, learned from the best. He took my mother's life and my words, believing that a name on a cover is more important than the hand that holds the pen. The fallout was cataclysmic. Sterling and Thorne filed for bankruptcy within 48 hours of the broadcast. The work-for-hire contracts were declared null and void by a landmark Supreme Court ruling that recognized creative coercion as a form of human trafficking. Arthur Vance died in prison 3 months later. They said it was a heart attack, but I think he simply ran out of breath when he realized no one was left to write his excuses. He died in a cell filled with blank paper, the one thing he feared most in the world. I used the remains of the Vance estate, the millions recovered from offshore accounts, not to buy a mansion or a fleet of cars. I founded the Ghost Writers Sanctuary. It's a publishing house and legal defense fund dedicated to protecting the shadow authors of the world. No more anonymous geniuses, no more stolen voices. Every book we publish has the author's real name in gold, and their story is their own. Elias stayed with me. He's the editor-in-chief now, a man who values the truth of a sentence more than the profit margin of a thriller. We live in the old Victorian house in Vermont, but the locks have been removed, and the attic is now a sun-drenched library where the wind carries only the scent of pine and freedom. One evening, while sorting through the last of the archival boxes, I found a small rusted key. It led to a drawer in my father's old desk that the police had missed. Inside was a single leather-bound volume, no title, no author. I opened it. It was blank. Every page was ivory smooth, waiting for a story that would never be stolen. I took a pen, my own pen, bought with my own money, and sat down at the window overlooking the mountains. I didn't write for my father. I didn't write for the critics. I didn't even write for the women who came before me. I wrote for the girl I used to be, the one who thought her voice was a ghost. The loudest sound in the world, I wrote on the first page, is the breath of a truth that is finally free. The Vance name is gone now.
I legally changed mine back to my mother's maiden name, Maya Sterling. I am not a legacy, I am a beginning. And as the ink dried on the page, I realized that the greatest masterpiece isn't a book you can buy in a store. It's the life you lead when you're no longer afraid of the silence.